Hi everyone, this is Shaun. In today's video, I'm going to do something a lot different. This video is geared towards the private citizen. This is not a video that's geared towards private security professionals, although most of the audience will be private security professionals. This video is geared towards you, the citizen. Perhaps you are somebody that is visiting private property. Maybe you live in an HOA, which is a homeowners association, some type of HOA development, and you're wondering whether or not private security on your property are allowed to pull you over. So this video is geared towards you folks. Let's talk about my background very briefly. I have a background in law enforcement, I have a background in security, and I have a background as a private security guard training instructor. I trained private security officers in the past. I have about 6 years of teaching experience for a private college teaching criminal justice, and I have about 2 years of experience at the community college level teaching the basic police academy. This video is not designed to be a substitute for any legal advice. I am actually not an attorney. I'm not an attorney. Nothing that I discuss in this video should be construed to be legal advice. It should not be construed to be professional advice. I don't tell you what your rights are. You also have to keep in mind that every jurisdiction is going to vary. Now, I'm from California. The laws in California may vary in your state as well. However, I will tell you that generally most of the states kind of tend to follow other states' direction with regards to the rules governing private security professionals. So let's begin. Can a private security guard or private security officer pull you over? Let me ask you this. Some of you might be in law enforcement, and again, I want to take your take on this. I'll accept your take on this. And some of you might be attorneys. I do have some attorneys that watch this, and again, I do want to get your perspective. Now, these types of videos tend to gather some frustrated people, and they'll comment in a frustrated tone, very disrespectful tone. If I will say on another note, if I do see comments that are disrespectful and out of line, I will ban them. I will ban the comments or block the comments. And if it's a continued issue, I will ban the actual YouTube follower or subscriber or whoever's making these comments. So please, let's be respectful. I have no problem at all if you disagree with what I have to say or what other people have to say, but we need to have a logic argument and not just start cursing everyone out, cursing somebody else out. There needs to be some logistic follow-up, logistic argument to whatever point it is that you're arguing. Okay, now let's begin. I'll tell you this. On private property, well, for sure, on public property, most of the time, private security officers do not have the authority to pull you over. It's when they're on private property when things get a little bit more complicated. Now, for some type of shopping center, I can't think of a reason that a private security officer can pull you over other than the fact that if you perhaps committed a misdemeanor, or felony, you committed some type of crime, when they're pulling you over, they're possibly trying to execute a lawful private person's arrest. Now, how they do that can mean the difference between a vehicle code violation or a crime. Now, we can all agree that in most states, it is a crime to impersonate a peace officer. If you give somebody the impression that you're a peace officer, that the private security officer is a peace officer, that's a punishable offense in most states. Let's talk about the method of them pulling you over. So, most likely, if they're going to pull you over on a retail property or attempt to pull you over, it's possibly with the amber lights. They might have some green lights. Do you have to pull over? Well, in your state, I'll tell you, especially in California, you don't have to pull over unless it's some type of emergency vehicle. So you don't even have to pull over. If you pull over, one of the arguments can be made is that you voluntarily stopped. It's not a detention because you could leave at any moment. Now, if you committed a crime and somebody's trying to effect a private person's arrest and you're trying to get away and they communicated to you that they're trying to effect a private person's arrest, well, you're going to have to stop. In many jurisdictions, you cannot resist a lawful private person's arrest. Now, is it a crime to flee when somebody is making a private person's arrest? That depends on your jurisdiction. In California, I can't think of any penal code section that says it's unlawful for you to flee a lawful private person's arrest. However, a private person is able to use a reasonable amount of force to detain you, to stop you, to put you into custody. A reasonable amount of force. Now, them ramming your car with their patrol unit, in many circumstances, especially for misdemeanor crimes, that is not a reasonable amount of force. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time it's not. So if you decide to pull over, it's because you voluntarily pulled over. Now, if the security vehicle has red or blue lights, many times, and there's many jurisdictions where that is illegal, some do allow them. But in California, when you have red or blue lights, if you're a private security professional, you're trying to pull somebody over in most circumstances, that can be viewed as impersonating a peace officer, because those colors are restricted to emergency vehicles. So if you're a private person and that happens, you might want to contact an attorney. If you're a private security professional watching this video, you should not have any red or blue lights on your patrol vehicle. Consider amber or another color. So retail environment, generally no, okay, unless they're trying to effect the private person's arrest. And let's be clear that when you pull over, you voluntarily pull over. There usually is no vehicle code section that says you have to pull over to a private security vehicle, okay? Now again, that's generalizing all of the states. Now this is where it becomes a little bit complicated. When you live on a HOA governed property, homeowners association governed property, you give away a lot of your rights. And that's one of the reasons why I probably wouldn't want to live on a HOA governed property. As a condition for you living on the property of an HOA, you're giving up certain rights. And some of the rights could be freedom. And you possibly agree to getting pulled over. Now, if you're a guest visiting an HOA property, you're probably saying, well, Shaun, I don't agree to getting pulled over. Well, you might be signing a list of rules and regulations, and that might actually be on there. So let's talk about why they would pull you over. Why would private security pull you over? Private security would pull you over if you violate an HOA violation. So maybe you ran through a stop sign, okay? Because generally police departments cannot enforce you running through a stop sign that's on private property, generally speaking. Now in California, if there are signs that state that the private property is patrolled by law enforcement and they are able to enforce the California Vehicle Code, something to that degree, then the police department, the law enforcement agency, can enforce the vehicle code. But generally, the vehicle code cannot be enforced, generally speaking, again, on private property, especially in California. Now, when you run a stop sign, you're probably committing an HOA violation. If you're an HOA resident, you agreed not to run through stop signs. And you probably agreed somewhere in the HOA, you agreed to cooperate with private security, which includes being stopped by them. If you are a private security professional and you're wondering how you can pull people over, even in California, well, it's because of you would need to see an HOA agreement where the residents agree to being stopped. Now, many times on these HOAs, what you do is you go through some type of guard tower or some type of a guard shack. You sign in, you produce your identification card. The private security professional logs down your driver's license, maybe registration, maybe insurance, and your license plate number. Logs everything down, photographs you on video, or video records you with inside of a certain vehicle. Now, many of these extravagant properties, they have license plate reader systems that logs the license plate down, the date, the time, and a photograph of the driver as well. Now, what can end up happening is a private security professional might try to pull you over because maybe you ran the speed limit, you went past the speed limit, you ran through a stop sign. For those reasons, if you pull over, it's because you volunteered to pull over. Now, an argument could be, well, a viable argument might be, well, I pulled over because I thought he was a police officer. Well, that's why the lights might be amber. They might be green. And a reasonable person should know that that's not a peace officer vehicle, because most peace officer vehicles will have red lights or blue lights or a combination of both. So that argument might be moot, and you might have to argue that at a court of appeals level, or maybe perhaps a Supreme Court level as well. And that's going to be the argument that you would have if you were an HOA member. Now, if you just continue to leave and not pull over, whatever address, if you're a visitor that you checked in yourself with, like for example, if it's unit number 28 that you assign yourself to, that's the resident that you're going to visit. If you just flee the property without pulling over, well, number 28 might get a citation from the HOA, maybe $100, maybe $300. They might get a citation for you fleeing, because there's somewhere in that HOA agreement, most likely that resident agreed that if a resident attempts to check in or checks in under their unit number as a visitor, that they are responsible for their conduct. So the driver would not get the citation; it'd be the HOA member. Okay. Now, if you do decide to stop and you do decide to accept the citation, if you pay it, that's good. But if you don't pay it, remember, number 28 is going to end up paying. And what happens if number 28 doesn't want to pay? Well, then the HOA puts a lien on the property. Let's talk about other types of crimes. What's very common in some of these properties is the crime of reckless driving. That is generally in California, that would be a misdemeanor. That would be a lower grade crime. If that was observed in the private security professional's presence, that private security professional can affect a private person's arrest. On the HOA property, the officer could attempt to effect arrest for that reckless driving. If you decide to stop, then that person can't put you under private person's arrest for reckless driving. But if you flee, okay, you decline to stop for the private security officer. Well, number one, the actual HOA owner, the resident, is going to get a fine. But also, there's not much that can be done. There's not much that the private security company can do without identifying who you are. But remember, if you checked in, then they could identify who you are, and they can forward a video. If they even have that, they could forward your name, date of birth, your address to an actual law enforcement officer who could potentially take a report. I don't know of agencies that would be willing to take a report for that reason, for reckless driving, and forward it to the district attorney's office. But I do know that there are some agencies that are willing to accept that type of request and actually forward it to a district attorney, and that person could eventually end up getting a warrant for the arrest for reckless driving, especially if the private security officer is willing to sign a private person's arrest for reckless driving. Sometimes I see some security companies advertising radar. Well, how do you enforce radar? Well, you have to have a radar system, and you should be on an HOA property. Again, this is where private security companies get the most power, is on HOA property. You would need this person to violate one of the HOA rules and regulations, which might be you can't exceed the speed limit of 10 or 15 miles per hour 24/7. Now my recommendation is this: if you're a private security company and you intend on enforcing radar, you should have somebody that's radar certified, because as far as I know, especially in California, just to be radar certified is about a 3-day course, and I think the LiDAR is either a 1 or 2-day course. But there's formal training that is required, because there's so many variances in the type of systems that are used. The radar gun has to be calibrated as well, and in all fairness, somebody needs to be trained. Can private security attend these schools that are offered by law enforcement that offer radar and LiDAR? It depends on your jurisdiction. Speaking with my experience in California, private security are not allowed in these courses unless they have completed a basic police academy. And many times, if they completed a basic police academy, they're trying to get a law enforcement job, or they're already at a law enforcement job. They're not all the time trying to get into private security with a basic law enforcement academy certificate. So in that circumstance, that person would probably not complete that level of training. But I think as a private security company, we owe it to the people that we serve to have the appropriate training before we're gonna start stopping people for HOA violations. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to other people that we need to have that level of training. Now, if you're a private security company and you're wondering, well, where do I get this training if my guys or gals are not allowed to complete the radar training at because they don't have academy? What can you do? Well, you can always hire a retired law enforcement officer that has that experience teaching others on how to use the radar guns and the LiDAR guns. So you might want to seek out those professionals. Maybe try to get a contract or some type of training agreement with a local college, and they might hire those instructors, or even the academy. Now, however, you're going to get some resistance. A lot of people don't want private security enforcing radar, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So I hope this video answers a lot of your questions on whether or not private security can pull you over. We discussed retail establishments, and for the most part, you have to have committed an offense, like some type of misdemeanor crime or felony, some type of crime. And I know other states refer to misdemeanors and felonies as different types of crime levels. So perhaps maybe a level 1 or level 2 crime, they may not consider them misdemeanors or felonies. But anyhow, any state that you're in, most of the time you have to have committed some type of crime. Okay, that could be shoplifting, it can be reckless driving, it can be even a bank robbery. But it has to be some type of crime. And on the second note is, if you leave the scene, and I'm not encouraging anybody to leave, because if you leave the scene, it just makes you look more guilty, especially in the eyes of law enforcement. They're going to look for the vehicle that's leaving first, and they're going to wonder why you left, and it might not help your case. But if you do decide to leave, in most states, in many states, it's not against the law to refuse a private person's arrest. And I'm not encouraging everybody to leave when private security is trying to detain you, because you might be in a state where it is against the law. In California, it's not against the law to flee when somebody is trying to effect a private person's arrest. But I will tell you this: remember, private security and any private person can use a reasonable amount of force in order to make you, in order to control you, in order to make you submit to them, and the force has to be reasonable as well. And we talked about the whole HOA development, how when you buy a house in an HOA development, you're agreeing to waiving a lot of rights that you would ordinarily would have if you did not live in an HOA. And one of the agreements or terms and conditions might be to obey all the stop signs, all the signals, and to obey the private security that are assigned to the company property. And somewhere in the agreement, you probably agreed to a fine if you were stopped by private security. You agreed to stopping for private security, but you also agreed to pay the fine. If you do not pay the fine, then you risk having a lien on your house. Somewhere in the agreement, you probably agreed that if a resident attempts to check in under your address as a visitor, or checks in as a visitor, and that person refuses to cooperate with private security, has committed some type of HOA violation in his or her presence, you probably agreed in that agreement that you would pay the fine or the fee on their behalf. And if you refuse, then you probably agreed for the HOA to put a lien on your property. So I hope this presentation helps those of you in law enforcement that have experience, attorneys. I want you to chime in. If you're a private security professional, I also want you to chime in. If you are a concerned citizen, you're concerned about the rights that you have, and you're concerned that private security might be overbearing, I'm willing to entertain any discussion. But you guys, regardless of your position, please be respectful towards other people's comments, and let's have a logical argument for whatever position it is that you hold. One last thing, I promise. This video is not designed to encourage private security companies to pull people over on private property or HOA property. If legal in your state, you have to consider a lot of things. You have to consider that pulling someone over, just the process is dangerous. You don't know who you're stopping. You don't know who's behind the wheel. You also have to consider that if you are pulling somebody over and they don't stop and you continue to follow them and you continue to pursue them, most private security professionals are not trained on how to drive in a pursuit-like condition. As a result of not having training or even experience, you might accidentally hit a pedestrian. You might end up having to accidentally hit a child that's crossing the road or some type of structure. So it's not always in the best interest for the HOA or for the client or for the security company to have a policy where you're pulling people over. But I'm going to leave that up to the private security company. Definitely, if you're going to do this, talk to an attorney, talk to a business professional, talk about the pros and cons. And remember, we have to understand that there are some HOAs out there, private companies out there that want private security to do pullovers because the police department or the law enforcement agency won't do that on that property. So there's a demand for it. The residents have spoken up in some of these areas, and they have demanded that the board hire a security company that is able to do these pullovers. But once again, I'm not saying that this is a good idea. I don't encourage security companies to do pullovers because once again, your average police officer has to go through a significant amount of training just to do these pullovers. They can be very, very dangerous. That's all I have. If you have any requests for future videos, comments, any other concerns, I'm looking forward to the dialogue.